Welcome back, Twisters, and happy Shark Fin Friday to you, where we talk about Team Teal on this channel. Nick here, just wanted to share a recent round of news and updates as it pertains to the San Jose Sharks. So in this video, we're going to be talking about Logan Couture and the possibility of injury, Patrick Marleau and Marcus Sorensen potentially on the trade block. We'll also talk about Martin Jones. So you ready to learn some things about Team Teal? Hit the like. Let's rock and roll, Mother Goose. So the first thing, Logan Couture, in the most recent game against the Los Angeles Kings, that was Wednesday, March 24th, toward the end of the game, Jeff Carter made a hit on Logan Couture, and that seemingly caught Couture in the jaw right there. The butt of Jeff Carter's stick had made contact with Logan Couture's jaw. He went down, looked kind of ugly at first, but fortunately Couture was able to pick himself up and skate off the ice with minimal assistance right there. But with Couture, of course, he's had a litany of injuries in his career, and even his jaw has been the subject of some damage in the past right there. So it's going to be interesting to see if Couture plays the next game or if there is any report as to how much time he could potentially miss. Nonetheless, the Sharks did recall from the San Jose Barracuda forward Jeffrey VIEL. And as for Jeff Carter, he's not going to face any further discipline from the NHL. It didn't look like a malicious hit. It just seemed kind of like an awkward collision. All right, let's move on. So next up, there are two players potentially on the trade block as been discussed by the media. Devan Dubnyk's also been mentioned, and I did discuss Devan Dubnyk in a video related to the trade deadline a couple weeks ago. But let's talk about two guys here. Patrick Marleau is the first name. He, of course, was traded to the Penguins at the trade deadline last season in exchange for a third-round pick. And, of course, we know that Marleau is pursuing Gordie Howe's record for all-time games played. He will tie Mark Messier on Saturday night for second all-time, which is crazy. And he is 13 games played away from tying Gordie Howe's record as I make this video. Jumbo Joe Thornton is sixth, by the way. In this season, Marleau has just 1 goal and 4 assists, with a plus-minus of 0 and an average time on ice of 13 minutes and 23 seconds. Now, one reason why Marleau could potentially be traded is because he hasn't had the kind of role that he wants with the club. He has been quoted saying that he could definitely contribute more offensively. He's been primarily playing on the fourth line, but he's also been slotted into the second line recently. But nonetheless, let's take a look at what Marleau has said to the media. When talking about his role for the majority of the season, Marleau has said, quote, "This kind of role I'm in 5-on-5 hasn't really allowed me to use my assets as much as I would like, obviously. It's one of those things where I know I can do a lot more out there. It's been definitely a challenge for myself." Regarding a trade, Marleau said, quote, "I wouldn't actively maybe look for it, but if it does happen or it does come or a team wants me, that's something you have to seriously consider. Obviously, that's still my goal, to win a Stanley Cup. It would definitely be something to consider," end quote. So what Marleau is saying, at least this is my interpretation, he wants the Sharks to be competing for a playoff spot, for that fourth spot. St. Louis has kind of been on a bit of a slide for the most part, although they did beat the Sharks a week ago in back-to-back right there. But nonetheless, if the Sharks can't get back into contention, and that window to do that is very slim as we approach the trade deadline, then maybe Doug Wilson works out a deal with somebody else. The Sharks are missing their 5th-round pick in this year's upcoming draft, so maybe they could fetch as high as a 5th-round pick for Marleau if they truly are sellers at the deadline. So we're going to see in the next couple of weeks. The Sharks have been putting together some better hockey recently, but even so, they've got quite a ways to go if they want to make up ground and challenge St. Louis. And with St. Louis maybe getting some players back who have been injured, then that makes the situation more difficult for Team Teal. The other player I want to mention is Marcus Sorensen. He's a 28-year-old winger. He is in the last year of his deal, so he'll be a UFA at the end of next season. Sportsnet's Chris Johnston has reported that Sorensen is drawing some interest from a couple of teams in the Canadian division, the North Division. And he said, quote, "Maybe a fit in Calgary there. We see the Flames. We're looking for an addition they can add up front, and I do think he will be someone moving before the deadline." So that's pretty interesting. The Flames, of course, could use some more secondary scoring. Sorensen has had a couple of shining moments in the playoffs particularly, and he's 2 seasons removed from a 17-goal season in which he was on primarily a third line with Joe Thornton. So put the right center around him, and maybe Sorensen could flourish. Now let's move on to something that has been almost a bright spot for this team over the last few games. Goaltending, right, guys? So Devan Dubnyk had certainly a great stretch with the Sharks, especially coming after his injury that kept him out for a little while. But then he struggled a little bit against Vegas and against St. Louis, somewhat understandably, and the team decided to bring back in Martin Jones to give him a shot to outduel Doobie. And Jones, over his last 4 games, and I know that's a small sample size, but he's been pretty sizzling. Let's take into account, nonetheless, this has come against the St. Louis Blues, the Anaheim Ducks, and 2 games against the Los Angeles Kings, who certainly aren't the same team that they were 2 years ago. They do actually compete pretty well out there. But nonetheless, Jones has been magnificent in those 4 games. He has saved 142 out of 147 shots in those 4 games with a .966 save. That's pretty ridiculous. That doesn't sound like Martin Jones to you. And because of that, for the first time this season, maybe after the first 6 games, his save percentage is now over 900. It's over 900! So it's 902 right now. But of course, his goals against is still pretty bad at 3.23. Certainly a reflection of how he was playing earlier in the season. But we'll get into some interesting numbers in just a moment here. So Darren Stevens, a statistician who I follow on Twitter, love what he posts out there. He said that Jones is the first Sharks goaltender in 28 years to make 40-plus saves in consecutive games. And interestingly, Jones did that against the team that he started his career with and won a Stanley Cup with, the Los Angeles Kings. Jones's quality start percentage right now is .474. The league average is .530, but as you can tell, statistically, that is certainly an improvement over where he's been the last couple of seasons. His goals saved above average is still -3.7, which does not look good no matter the number of starts. So Jones is certainly trending in the right direction, but he still has some ground to make up in order for the Sharks to think that they could potentially retain him. I still think that with 3 years left on his deal, even with a steep cap hit, I think the Sharks could potentially buy him out next season, or if he plays really well for the rest of the season, maybe he does get exposed to Seattle. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the goaltending situation. Of course, Devan Dubnyk is also a UFA after next season. Here's what's really interesting, though. Look at Jones's advanced statistics, and I particularly want to point to his save percentages by team strength. So when it comes to the power play, Jones is actually not doing so well, or at least when the Sharks have to kill a penalty. His save percentage is only .819, whereas last season, as bad of a year as it was statistically for Jones, it was .918 when shorthanded. That's actually pretty ridiculous. But it's only .819 this season, so that's the worst that it's been in his career, and by far the worst it's been with the Sharks. Nonetheless, the team has been playing a lot better on the penalty kill recently. I think that basically they've climbed in about a 1-month span from, I think, 24th in the NHL, around the middle of the pack, 15th, 16th. So the team's getting better. We'll see if that actually is reflected in Jones's statistics. But let's look at this, though. So the past 2 years, .895 and .891 save percentages in 5-on-5 play, or at least even strength play. This year, though, that has gone up to .913. And as you can tell by the statistics here, that is in the same neighborhood as the 16-17 and 17-18 seasons. Those were the last 2 good seasons for Jones. So it's good to see that he's doing well 5-on-5. And the last thing that I want to mention, just really quickly, this doesn't really have much of an impact on the team, but Bob Boughnner and Curtis Gabriel were fined in the first of the 2 games against the Los Angeles Kings earlier this week. So basically what happened was the Kings' Curtis McDermott, during the warm-ups, was skating kind of on the red line, and he might have crossed into the Sharks side of things, and Gabriel went over to McDermott and cross-checked him in the back, and so he got a max fine of that, which is basically $3,000. And then the 2 guys dropped the gloves against each other in that game. Curtis McDermott definitely got the best of Gabriel. Interestingly enough, though, these guys were actually teammates with each other with the Owen Sound attack. So I think that they probably just wanted to have some fun out there. And then Bob Boughnner was also fined, I think, as a result of that instance right there. I don't know what he said, but he was fined $5,000. So again, I don't think this has any sort of impact on the club. But Gabriel wasn't in the lineup the last game. I think the Sharks are only kind of inserting him when they're going to go up against some of the beefier teams out there. The Arizona Coyotes, I don't expect to see Curtis Gabriel in the lineup against them. So anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this round of news and updates. Make sure to stay in the loop by hitting the notifications bell and subscribing if you haven't already, because I'm covering the San Jose Sharks throughout the rest of this season, maybe the postseason, and definitely the offseason and beyond. Thanks so much for tuning in, Twisters. Once again, I'm Nick. I'll catch you Twisters later. Go Sharks, baby.